This week on Hip Hop Now podcast, the year was 2002, 15 years later.
But let's get right to business.
Read these headlines. This album must be gone. This album must be gone.
Classic albums are.
Come to Hip Hop Podcast.
What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and this is Hip Hop Now Podcast Extra, a podcast designed to catch you up on all things hip hop, music, and culture that happened throughout the week. But not today, because today is an extra podcast where we focus in on one topic at hand. And if you don't know, if you haven't been following me at Vegas World INC on social media, or right here at soundcloud.com/hip hop now podcast, or listening to this show right now, right here on Death Star Radio, DSR.FM, or you can download the app, which is free, iOS and Android, whatever you do. You would know that maybe a couple of weeks ago, I did a podcast focused solely on the 25th anniversary of hip hop albums that were released in 1992. And absolutely right after I did that joint, I was like, you know what? I should do this again. I should move the needle up a little bit, not go back to 1982, because honestly, this is not a old head podcast. This isn't a millennial podcast. This is an everybody podcast. And I know there's some people who, listen to the 1992 podcast, which is dope, soundcloud.com/hip hop now podcast. But I'm saying podcast a lot. But 10 years later, it was a different time for different people. For some of those people like myself who were around to soak in those 1992 hip hop albums, some of which were classics. And 2002, I was still a hip hop fan, and I know some people, was in high school who might have been kids in 92 or whatever. Maybe wasn't even born. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not counting right now. But we're just going to go over some of those albums that were released in 2002 as far as the internet could take me with that. And I'm going to just let you know right now, it was when you look back at it, it was a strange kind of year. Eminem, big year for Eminem, lyrically, successfully, I guess financially, a lot of underground hip hop was released. Jay-Z and a Nas album that came after, the whole Jay-Z versus Nas beef. Cameron reemerging. Snoop Dogg kind of reemerging. Then we had a couple people fall off the wagon, but let's just get into it, man. It's a lot to cover here. First and foremost, let's just get it started, man. One of the albums that was released in 2002, arguably his best album. I've talked about it on this podcast before. It's The Eminem Show, which is Eminem's fourth album. Was released on May 26th of 2002 on Aftermath Entertainment, Shady Records, and Interscope Records. Won many Grammy Awards. Like I've said in past podcasts, a lot of people, don't rock with Eminem for the same reason they say others do rock with him, because he's white. But that's the obvious part. The reason why some of us, at least, not the hype train dudes, but some of us at least really dig Eminem is because, for one, he doesn't compromise who he is just to fit in with either cool crowd. He didn't really change up his style or his direction to fit his commercial success. He didn't really kiss up to the people who were raising him above all the other black hip hop artists, because of the simple fact that he was in line with black hip hop artists. You know what I'm saying? Those are the people he measured himself. Those are the people who he studied as a hip hop fan, regardless of his skin color. And more importantly, this album, he does a lot of that. I know a lot of people say, oh yeah, he's killing his moms and blah, blah, blah. Well, listen to the record and Cleaning Out My Closet. Listen to that record. Exhibit A. You know what I'm saying? Dope record. Of course, the usual Slim Shady quirky records were on there, but people were into that for some reason. I was into some of it, but not all of it. A track like White America, where he's basically going at white America. And, detractors may say, well, yeah, when you're benefiting from it, you're not really going to get hurt by it but he's acknowledged that. You know what I'm saying? There's nothing Eminem could say, and he's tried to say everything to make that part of the mainstream hate him. And he goes diamond every time. So, what are you going to do? But again, regardless, one of his dopest albums in his catalog, released in 2002. If you've never heard it, check it out. Listen with those points in mind because you might like it. Another album that was released in 2002, a double album, follow-up to what some consider a classic, by the homie Jay-Z, released in November of 2002. This was back when Jay-Z would release an album like every year. A lot of people did not like this album, myself included. Why? Not because it was overall whack. That's not true. But because it wasn't a good double album. Honestly, and he wound up doing this a little bit later, honestly, he could have just took the dopest records off of, this double album, which there are a number of them, and made one classic album. And he kind of, he's coming off of getting trounced by Ether. Don't debate it. It happened. So now, you kind of get a different Jay-Z from the Jay-Z, that was on Blueprint and every album before that. It kind of changed him. That battle changed him. A little insecurity or whatever was in there, but he had some dope records on there. Like, I like the You Don't Know remix with M.O.P. That's when M.O.P. was on there. Man, I'm going through this. I'm looking like, wait, maybe I don't like as many records as I thought. That's not true. I love Meet the Parents, a prime example of Jay-Z storytelling, being really dope. Blueprint 2. Now, the dope part about Blueprint 2, the record Blueprint 2, is the fact that it was the Nas rebuttal we should have got instead of Super Ugly. Because Jay-Z had some really strong points that would have evened out that battle. You know what I'm saying? Super Ugly was emotional and it was trash. It just wasn't up to Jay-Z's standards. It was literally just an invitation to physically fight. There was no skill, not really thought out. It was just, how can I make this dude want to get in the streets with me and fight? And that's not hip hop. But the Blueprint 2, even though it was kind of late, because it was like a year later after Ether, the things he's saying in there, he's touching on some really good points, but, just didn't work out. Excuse Me Miss, of course, everybody knows that. That was a dope record. I really like a lot of the records that I guess were supposed to be like bonus cuts, but they were some of my favorite. Like What They Gonna Do, Part 2. I really like that joint. And excuse the language, I know this is a family podcast, but this is the name of the record, and the record was good. Bitches and Sisters, basically giving you the divide between who he refers to as a bitch versus who he refers to as sisters. So not every woman, all black woman, is a bitch when you hear a rapper saying it. I really dug that joint. Show You How to Do This. Of course, everybody know that record. So there was a lot of joints on there, but it was somewhat of a disappointment because, you had All Eyes on Me, which is probably very close to being the best, if not the best hip hop double album, along with Life After Death. Biggie and Tupac did it. Jay, not so much. And coming off of the Blueprint and, the L with Ether, it just was. He was still winning, don't get me wrong, he was still successful, but it just wasn't up to par. And then from that point on, we got albums that were sketchy. But the Black Album did come out, and that was great. Blackalicious, Blazing Arrow also came out in 2002. Around that time, I believe I was still hosting a hip hop show that came out on April 30th of 2002, but I actually had it early. Played the heck out of that joint on the radio. Another one, because we got to keep it moving. There's a lot here, and I'm going too long on some of them. Another album, the Clips debut album, Lord Willing, was released in August of 2002. Everybody knows Grinding, but let me tell you something. Back then, this is when I was living in B-More. I feel like every song on that album was on the radio. The Clips were dominating the summer. I know there was a lot that was hot, but for a new act to just dominate the way they were doing, I mean, it was so many joints on there that I feel like I haven't listened to this album so long. I may have to revisit it. But yeah, man, like they had the Grinding remix, just really dope, and just a dope duo of MCs to to debut under Pharrell, no less, who, was kind of tied more to commercial sounding music. And this was hardcore, you know what I'm saying? And I know some people consider their second album, Hell Have No Fury, as their best, but I don't know, because I like that album just as well, but I kind of felt like, well, Lord Willing, I was like, I don't think I dislike a record at all. Not one. Not one. LP released an album entitled Fantastic Damage. Shout out to all the underground heads. Yes, I'm going to let you know right now, this is the same LP from Run the Jewels. So it's okay. You can go back. The album was released on a legendary underground label, Definitive Jukes, in May of 2002. Another album, I should say, that, got a lot of spins on a hip-hop show, Strictly Hip Hop. Shout out to them. Strictly Hip Hop, every Friday, midnight to 5 a.m., still on air. But I was trying to spread it around. We was trying to make sure that we not only hit the real hot joints that everybody was talking about, but we also were digging that underground bag and, make sure that people know, hey, okay, this dude ain't getting airplay nowhere else, but he got some dope stuff. Another album that to many is considered a classic, and that's kind of rare, and it only happens with certain individuals, and one off the top I could think of, and it's not hip hop, it's like Earth, Wind and Fire. But when like your greatest hits or your unreleased material becomes like a huge album in itself, you can't go wrong with that. That album being Nas, The Lost Tapes, released in September of 2002, featuring a lot of the records that were originally supposed to be on, it pains me every time I say it, but the I Am Nostradamus, the double album, not what came out, not I Am and Nostradamus, but the double album that was originally supposed to be released, that I have a copy of it. If that was released, there would have never been any Nas Fell Off. You know what I'm saying? It really wouldn't have been, because he was firing on all cylinders. I mean, the records on here, you know what I'm saying, that were just, I played the death out of it. Do-Rags, you know what I'm saying? What else was on here? You Gotta Love It with AZ. I think Dr. Dre did that beat. Blazer 50, No Ideas Original, Everybody's Crazy, Purple, love that joint. Drunk by Myself, Papa Was a Player, and Fetus, the joint where he's kind of basically describing his being growing in his mom's womb and, and being born. I mean, just classic Nas material. And this was like an unreleased and B-side style album, and everybody has it. Everybody has it. And it's gotten to the point now where people are thirsty for a sequel to that, but I don't know if you'll be able to get classic style records, from whatever Nas didn't put out today, because who knows, maybe he did put the best that he had on I was going to say Life is Short. That's not right. Life is Good. That's not right at all. What else was released that year? Power and Numbers, Jurassic 5. Talib Kweli put out an album called Quality. I wasn't too great on that, even though, Talib is never really whack. Another album that came out that was kind of polarizing, but in a different way. That album being Common's Electric Circus. When was that released? That was released in December of 2002. Let me tell you something, man. That album was a disappointment to many of us Common fans. Now, it's not that he did something different. It was really based off of the momentum and the current relationship with Erykah Badu. But the momentum he had going into that album, you got to understand, One Day to All Make Sense is, to me, Common's best album, or at least my favorite album from Common. Then he followed that up with Like Water for Chocolate, which just raised the stakes lyrically and musically, and it felt like, man, Common is starting to put himself, not that he wasn't already high up on that lyricist list, but really starting to plant his feet and really dig in. And we all knew something was up because Common was looking kind of crazy. He was kind of looking like Isaac Hayes, wearing sweater hats and triple X turtlenecks and just looking wide-eyed and talking about he's celibate with Erykah Badu when every other rapper wasn't. Shout out to the DLC. And this album was kind of a reflection of that. Now, let me say this, man. I mean, this album was more like neo soul with rap in it. I love neo soul, but again, Common, we just weren't ready for it. And I'll tell you this about that album. That album makes more sense today than it did back in 2002. Because back in 2002, that's not what the wave was, Now, neo soul was popping, but in hip hop, nobody was really doing that. Some of the albums I named, you go back and listen to them, they're completely different. And, you got to take your hat off to Common for doing something different. It just didn't work, It didn't work for him lyrically. So, I mean, what are you going to do? Things happen. It's whatever. Also, Mr. Lift put out an album that year, I Phantom. That was released in, when was that? When did that come out? That was also on Def Jux. That was released in September of 2002. Another underground joint for you. Missy Elliott. I don't talk about Missy Elliott from a rap standpoint, but I'm just gonna say it like this, right? Under Construction is probably my favorite Missy album. You know how a couple of years later, a lot of the youth started to really dig into that whole 80s styles, from the beats to the looks. Missy kind of brought that back on his album. She had some dope records. Some of those beats were crazy. Of course, you don't come to Missy for lyrics whatsoever. You just don't. You know what I'm saying? That's not what she do. But as far as just entertainment, you know what I'm saying, and stuff sounding funky, she did that, and it was pretty dope, to me at least. Cameron, also brand new on Rockefeller in 2002, released his not debut, but debut Rockefeller release. I almost said Rock Nation. No, we going back in time. It's 2002. The name of the album, Come Home With Me, released in May of 2002. And even though I'll say this is not my favorite Cameron album, there wasn't a lot of whack stuff on this album at all. I mean, Cameron was on fire back then. Him and the whole Dipset. This was around that time where Dipset was big, you know what I'm saying, with the mixtapes, and Cameron just killed it with with this album, which was his third album. I'm more of a sports, drugs, and entertainment dude, but I mean, you go back and listen to this album, you realize, like, wow, Cam was in the zone. This was his peak when he was on Rockefeller. Some of that being the production of Kanye and Just Blaze, just that whole team and the whole stamp of being with Rockefeller just took him to a new level. Sometimes it makes me a little bit sad because knowing that Big L was also going to be on Rockefeller, that production with Big L's lyrics, come on, man. You already know. Also released in 2002, celebrating 15 years, Scarface, The Fix, released in August of 2002. I've been a big Scarface fan since his debut album, Mr. Scarface is Back. And this album was also really like in the same vein as that Cameron album because it featured a lot of production that you wasn't used to hearing on a Scarface project. Records like On My Block, you know what I'm saying, which had the same beat as the M.O.P. Joint, World's Famous, but I wasn't mad at it because both records were dope. What else? Guess Who's Back? You know, that joint featuring Jay-Z and Beanie Siegel, I believe. Someday, I think that was a joint with Faith. Nas was on this album as well. Some people will say this is Scarface's best album because it was more of a resurgence for him. You know what I'm saying? It was kind of like, you know, you felt like, okay, Scarface was the thing that happened back then, early 90s and throughout the 90s. 2002, you wasn't really expecting Scarface to put out a hot album the way this album was. This album got a lot of burn. Also released that year, and we're going to run through a couple because of time, but Devin the Dude, Just Trying to Live. Y'all already know I like Devin the Dude, man. Don't debate me, man. I like it. It's underrated storyteller. Do not sleep. Don't sleep at all. Jay-Z also, this ain't complete hip-hop, but I'm just realizing Jay-Z also released Best of Both Worlds with R. Kelly in the same year. Jay-Z was working, but, you know, just unfortunately it wasn't all great. DJ Jazzy Jeff, The Magnificent, also came out in 2002. When was that? That was also in August. Man, August was a hot month, man. We already named a couple of joints that came out that year. J Live also released the album, All of the Above. Royce the 5'9", I believe this was Royce's first album entitled Rock City. I'm going to tell you right now, and that was released in November of 2002. I wasn't the biggest fan of Royce in the past, but man, am I a fan today. DJ Shadow also released the album in 2002, The Private Press. If you don't know, typically does like the compilation thing. That was released in June of 2002. A lot of dope hip hop, a lot of lyrics there. What else before we get in it? Snoop Dogg released the album Paid the Cost to Be the Boss, which had some Premier production on it, you know, which is something I never thought I would hear, but probably the standout track was the commercial hit Beautiful. I know some people would be like, I don't care about that, but yeah, the joints with that Premier did with Snoop, I was like, you know, what the hell would Snoop sound like over a Premier track? And it wasn't bad at all, to be honest. I wasn't mad at it. Let's see, is there anything else here worth mentioning? Because there was a whole bunch of joints. Like Slum Village put out an album, Trinity, Past, Present, and Future. You know what I'm saying? Let's see, what else was here? It's a lot of albums, a lot of lyrical, spiritual miracles going on here. Project Pat put out an album for those fans. But lastly, I want to talk about one of the albums that also came out that year, 8 Mile, the soundtrack to Eminem's movie 8 Mile, featuring a number of notables, especially 50 Cent, who was also on the rise, and Wankster was on that soundtrack. Rakim was on there. Gangstar was on there. Who else was on there? Obi Trice was on there. Jay-Z and Freeway were on there. Exhibit. Couple of people are on there. But Lose Yourself, arguably Eminem's greatest record, right next to Stan. If as an MC, if this doesn't get you excited the way that record begins, I mean, you could work out to this. You know what I'm saying? You could get yourself hyped up to do whatever. Maybe not, go any violence or nothing like that. Well, maybe, who knows? But just a description of getting ready to battle and lose yourself in the music, in the moment. You own it. Better never let it go. Like, that sounds whack when I say it like that. But I'm saying, man, the soundtrack as a whole wasn't like, I wasn't blown away by it. You know what I'm saying? I thought a lot of records were cool. Some of them didn't really hit the mark. Some of which I named from some big stars. But honestly, the standouts was the Eminem records. You know what I'm saying? With all those dudes featured on here, the standouts were the Eminem records, and let alone the movie. It took me a minute to actually watch the movie because at the time I can't remember what was going on, but it took a while for me to even get to the movie and watch it, and especially after learning that M had basically freestyled his battle verses in the movie. You know what I'm saying? So, which was pretty dope, you know what I'm saying? And especially for some of the stuff he was saying. But it's just a testament to how dope of an MC he is. And I know we kind of started this off with M, and now we're ending it with M. But 2002 was a big year for Eminem. And I think it was also the year, like, remember he was dissing Cannabis, who also released an album that year that nobody cared about, called Mic Club, The Curriculum. And he got the Get Jiggy With It suit on. I'm not really going to judge that much, but because of the simple fact that I don't remember ever listening to it. But chances are it was whack. And Eminem dissed him on the Eminem show, and that was it for Cannabis. But at the end of the day, I believe he also, this was around the time where the whole Benzino thing, and if you've never heard Nail in a Coffin, I'm sure it's easy to diss somebody like Benzino, and maybe you want Eminem to prove himself against more elite rappers, but honestly, there's a reason why it's never happened, and it's not just because of Eminem. Trust me. There's certain dudes who are like, do I really want to lose to this cat? You know what I'm saying? Because he's just on a whole nother lyrical level with his thought process. And, Lose Yourself was just one of those records that, captured that fire that's in him, that's in any MC that wants to compete. So I never really looked at it like, yo, Eminem's the best, he's better than everybody, because I like a lot of rappers. I don't have to like one better than the other. Of course, I have my favorites. But I really admire M's passion for hip-hop and for lyricism. And when he wants to write a record that's not kidnap my baby moms or, do this with my moms or whatever, he can do it. It's just that some choose to ignore it because they're more comfortable with their opinion of, detracting from what's clearly hip-hop at its finest. But that's it. That were some of the dopest albums, and some that weren't too crazy, that were released in 2002. In 2017, these albums are celebrating 15 years. So what should you do? Go out and listen to some of these records. Take some of the context I just gave you. Look up some of it yourself. Don't always trust Wikipedia. It's crowdsourced. But listen to it, man. Don't be afraid to go back. It doesn't have to be a bona fide classic for you to go back and enjoy it. That's going to do it for me for this week. You can follow me on social media at Vegas World INC. Please know that this podcast is available on iTunes, Google Play Music, Stitcher Radio, Podbean, TuneIn Radio, and SoundCloud.com/Hip Hop Now Podcast, as well as Death Star Radio. Until next week, y'all, I am not a critic. I'm a fan. Peace.